Hi, and welcome to another Perspective video. I'm Victoria Pertusa, content producer for Red Thread, and I'm here today with Glenn Rickson, Associate Director with the Europe Power and Renewables Research Team. How are you doing today, Glenn?
I'm very well, thank you, Victoria.
Today, we're going to talk about how data centers are outpacing infrastructure growth. Can you start by explaining the context here, and how has the surge in AI use and the construction of data centers impacted energy consumption worldwide?
Yes, for sure. So data centers and AI growth generally have been a big issue for power markets around the world in the last 2 or 3 years. That's particularly been the case for the US market, where we have seen an explosion of data center penetration and a big uplift in power demand. We expect that data center growth will account for about 60% of total power demand growth in the US over the next 5 years. And the reason for that is that AI servers and their cooling requirements are very electricity intensive. And there has been a greater penetration in the US than in other markets, but we are also seeing significant growth rates, particularly in China, everywhere really, but to a lesser degree in Europe, where the numbers are much more subdued. Europe has been going through a kind of downturn in power consumption generally over the last 5 years or so. Data centers have been one source of upside, but we are seeing in the US and in Europe and everywhere else that power limitations are increasingly being a constraint, both in terms of the supply of the power, but getting that power to the relevant data centers as well. So I think the next few years will be crucial for that. At the moment, or at least in some places, data centers are seen as a problem for the power sector, but I think they certainly have the possibility to become an opportunity as well, both in terms of absolute growth of power demand, but also how that demand interacts with the wider power systems as well.
What are the main challenges these data centers pose for energy suppliers?
Well, I think the two sectors, the data center world and the power, the energy world, are coming from two different directions in many ways. They have different sets of priorities. So in the case of data centers, they typically want to connect as soon as possible, certainly within the next 2 or 3 years. They want a reliable baseload supply of electricity. Ideally, they'd like it cheap and also low carbon as well. And on the flip side, from the power world, things generally take a lot longer to go ahead in terms of, it might take a maximum, maybe in the case of Europe and nuclear, can take up to 20 years to build a nuclear power plant. But certainly we're looking at longer time scales for any forms of new supply compared to the connection time for a data center. Also, increasingly power supply is intermittent, so more wind and solar means that it's not so predictable and baseload. You can't just build a nuclear power plant that provides low carbon baseload power to a data center. That's a major investment that takes many years to go ahead. And then really the other key thing is the behavior of data center demand. Typically, it is relatively price insensitive if you are an inference use case where essentially you need to respond to users almost immediately. Then you not only need the power at a particular time, but ideally you need a particular location as well, because you want to be close to your customer base and you want to be close to the data infrastructure. And what that typically means, and this is one of the big problems of the power sector, is that you want to congregate where there is already power consumption and potentially worsen existing constraints on the power network.
Is there good news here? Can the growth of data centers be good news for the energy industry?
Yeah, I think it certainly can. Compared to, say, the wider context of power consumption, whether that's you and me as residential consumers or maybe at the other end of the extreme, like a steelworks, where we don't see much flexibility in demand. For the most part, people want to use the power when they need it and where they need it. With data centers, there is certainly more potential for being able to flex in both time and space, really. So turning down power consumption, particularly if it's of the non-time sensitive variety, so whether that's AI training or something similar, then they are better placed. They're more sophisticated users than most in being able to turn down or maybe shift power demand from one country to another country. And I think that that has potential to be a really valuable tool for the power sector itself in the future. So that's one element, but also the absolute lift in power demand as well is kind of really valuable for a market like Europe, where we have seen many years of kind of declining demand because energy costs, etc. It's been a bit of a boon for the sector to see the growth that we have in the last few years.
And finally, where do we go from here, and what does S&P Global Energy predict that the future of data center is going to look like?
Well, I think certainly, I mean, the absolute, there's clearly growth there. The only question is how much growth there is. So we think over the next, let's say, 5 or 6 years, that we do see between 10 and 15% annual growth in data center demand on a global level. That will be higher in some markets like the US and lower in others. The key question, obviously, is how much growth, but also where that growth is. So it is a very regional, it can be a very regional growth rate. We're not seeing it evenly distributed, even within Europe, let's say. It's kind of concentrated in a relatively handful of markets, and that is likely to continue. But I would see over time power sector pressures coming in to require diversification. And I think that's one of the things that will happen, is that data centers will need to become essentially energy infrastructure. They'll need to participate in energy markets, and they will be able to benefit from that participation through revenue potential from offering flexibility to the market as well. So I do think that they're here to stay as key parts of the energy infrastructure world.
Thank you for your time, Glenn, today. And for those watching, see you next time.